Welcome to another edition of Native Bidaské. I'm Levi Rickert, your host. We have Chance Rush as co-host today. On Tuesday of this week, the Brookings Institution released a report. And they analyzed the impact and and I really like what they did with this. They really talked about the long-term ramifications if the government doesn't do something to change how tribal nations are funded nationwide. And with us today is Robert Maxim, a friend of ours. And Robert, you've been on Native Bidaské before. Welcome back. Let's talk about this government shutdown. And Chance, how you doing, man? Where are you? You're in Philadelphia?
Yes, I'm out here in beautiful Choctaw, Mississippi Choctaw territory. I am attending
Oh,
with
that's I thought you were talking about Liberty Bells, Philadelphia.
oh no, man, even better, man, even better, man. I'm
Even
on the
better.
I'm on
Okay,
the territory, the homelands of the Mississippi Choctaw down here in Philadelphia, beautiful Philadelphia, Mississippi, at the American Indigenous Tourism Conference. I get to play host, and so I'm very grateful and thankful to be down here. I know it's crazy sometimes, Levi. Like every time we do an episode, I'm either at the Hall of Fame. Last week I think I was at the Hall of Fame. It was only fitting because he had Billy Mills on, and I was at the Hall of Fame there doing that. But you know, uh, doing very well. And I'll be honest with you both. We're pushing through. We just rebranded. I think it was the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association. Now we go by the new name of the Indigenous. The American Indigenous Tourism, and just serving as the event MC. And a lot of discussion was brought up today about the shutdown and about everything that has just been going on from COVID, Doge, the layoffs, the shutdown, and it's really bringing up some topics here. And I know that we're really pushing through it. And this is a great series. This is a great episode this week. So let's just jump right on into it, there, Levi and Robert. We thank you for joining us. I know that you're going to give us a lot of really good insight. And just off the top of my head, because I've been meeting with so many tribal leaders downstairs, like what could tribal communities expect during this time? And is there already like a small ripple effect that you see? Are we going to be okay? But I'm just going to go ahead and jump in. Sorry about that. Go ahead, boss.
What
no,
it's
go ahead.
okay. Good to
Robert,
see you.
go ahead.
Yeah. Katapatash, thanks so much for having me with you. I mean, you're absolutely right. I would say it's going to be more than a small ripple effect that tribes and Native people in particular are going to see because of the shutdown. We're in an interesting position if you think about some of the major federal agencies that support Indian country. One of the most important, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, is seeing a significant number of its staff either furloughed right now or needing to work without pay. And so what impact does that have, right? It's you know, funds, grants that otherwise would be going out right now aren't going out because there's no staff to do that work. There
Mm,
are calls from tribal leaders to the federal government with questions, technical assistance, uh, you know, an interest in discussing funding streams that aren't going out, and those calls aren't getting answered because there's no one, in the office to manage those phones and serve as outreach to tribal leaders. And so these are happening with some of the most important agencies for supporting Indian country, and it's not just BIA. You're seeing it across multiple agencies right now.
Yeah, I watched the Senate committee hearing on Wednesday, and we did some reporting. Sean Griswold from our staff, he did a great job. Uh, I was actually taken back by that because what you just talked about, people who have been furloughed, those who are in critical positions that help get the money distributed to
Yeah.
tribes, they're not there. And as a journalist, and Rob talked to us what your response would be. We try to get a hold of the federal government, and it's just like they have basically said we have because of the big bad Democrats, we are closed down, and we'll get back to you afterward. That's basically the message that we're getting, and with Native Americans, it really to me is not a partisan issue, right? The trust and treaty responsibility is not a partisan issue. So I wish they would just say, hey. Uh, we do have somebody on staff. We're going to answer as many questions as we can, but even if most of their employees are furloughed. But Rob, what's your reaction? Are you getting the same thing from the government that it's very difficult to get straight answers?
Oh yeah, I mean, we are working on another piece right now, and we're thinking about some of the impacts of the congressional budget bill and some of the long-term funding streams that have gone to Indian country over time. And we want to pick up the phone to talk with some of the statisticians in the government, and we can't talk to anyone right now because they're not in their offices, right? But I want to bring it back to the point you made, Levi, about the trust and treaty obligations and the impact that this is having on those. I think the important thing for folks to remember, and people in Indian country are going to know this, right? But other people need to know this as well, is those trust and treaty obligations are prepaid for. They're prepaid for in the land that tribes seceded to the federal government. They're prepaid in the lives of our ancestors that in many cases, were lost to the US federal government. And so this is not something that, the federal government has the leisure every year to decide how much or how little they want to pay to Indian country. This is something that really needs to be done in a way that is consistent, uninterrupted, and sustained over time. And so that's why in the piece we suggest some ideas for how the federal government can change how they fund Indian country to actually reflect the obligations that it owes to Indian country.
Mm-hmm. And we may have different policies, across Turtle Island. What could tribal leadership be telling the community what to embrace for a time like this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that a lot of tribes are getting to embrace right now is mutual aid and solidarity, right? So one of the things you heard at the hearing yesterday was stories of how there are tribes that are turning now again to traditional hunting and fishing to support their tribal elders in a moment of food insecurity when we may have SNAP food stamp benefits turned off as soon as Saturday, right? There are other tribes that are fortunate enough to have the resources to begin, taking over for some of the programs that are going to be halted, at least temporarily, by the federal government. So to the extent that there can be, that mutual solidarity, I think that's so important. But that is not to let the federal government off the hook on a lot of this stuff. And so I think that yesterday's hearing was so important because it gave Congress a chance to hear directly from tribal leaders and others in Indian country about the very real impacts that the shutdown's having on real people, on real Native people.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, this isn't just exclusive to Indian country, the impacts of the shutdown. This is happening for communities across the US. So I really think for tribal leaders to continue to tell these stories is so important. The last thing I'll say is there are a couple programs in Indian country that currently are operating as normal, right? Indian Health Service has what's called advanced appropriation, so they're allowed to continue operating during the shutdown. Bureau of Indian Education is allowed to continue operating during the shutdown for the school year. And I worry that because a couple of those high-profile programs are still operating, it means that lawmakers and policymakers can take their eye off the ball and say, well, Indian country's fine. Their schools are going, their healthcare is going. What do we need to worry about? And I think that's why it's so important for tribal leaders and others to continue to share these stories and do so in a public way so that people understand the impact that this shutdown is having.
Yeah. Now, I do want to say that we at Native News Online want to hear from, speaking to the audience now, from you directly. And I like to, on our editorial staffs, we like to address where the rubber hits the road in Indian country, because what the government will tell you or corporations or anything else is always there's a difference. And that side of it's called public relations. What we do is journalism. And on the journalistic side, we want to hear your stories. So please send us if there's situations going on that need to get, we can shed the light on it, send it to an email to editor@nativenewsonline.net, editor@nativenewsonline.net, because we really do want to hear ground level what's really going on. And both of you mentioned the tribes, and one thing about Native people. I jokingly say you give a Native person a quarter, they're going to try to figure out 6 ways to split it up to help their brothers, their cousins, or whoever else. But even it's tribes that are digging deep into their coffers, and Cherokee Nation this week declared a state of emergency, and they found $6.5 million to help feed their people of Cherokee. But you have to wonder, Rob, how often can tribes really do that? And not all tribes can afford to do that, such as Cherokee Nation. So what's your suggestion that tribes should really do? And how can we get Congress back to Washington and really get done what needs to be done?
Yeah, that's what really is so embarrassing for the federal government, I think, right now, is that you have so many tribes, some of which have resources, right? You mentioned, Cherokee Nation, but others that don't, who are digging in to their reserves, digging into their coffers, and trying to support their relatives. And you have the federal government sitting on certain pots of money that may or may not be able to be released to support people in the short run, and they're not taking those steps. And so you do really see that distinction between tribal governments, which I think are trying to be really responsive to their citizens and do so in line with Indigenous values. And folks in Washington that don't think that that's the same priority. Now, in terms of what can be done, I think one of the important things here is, look, I don't know when the shutdown's going to end. I don't think really anyone can predict that right now. What we've said in our piece is that this needs to be a moment when Congress does reconvene for there to be a really permanent structural change in how the federal government funds Indian country. And so in our piece, we outlined a series of programs, and the federal government tracks this every year. There's about 30 different agencies and departments that fund Indian country in some capacity. And we've said moving forward, these different funding streams, they need in the short run, they need to get advanced appropriations so they aren't affected by shutdowns. But in the long run, they need to receive mandatory funding in the way that Social Security or Medicare does, so that, Congress not only can't mess with it during a shutdown, but they can't mess with the funding levels for these essential programs every year. And that's what we think really needs to be done moving forward is this much stricter view of funding Indian country that makes it mandatory and prioritizes it like the legal obligation that it is.
Yes, and I think your report indicated was up to like 69% of funding for Indian country is in fact discretionary, not that
Yeah, and that's a low end estimate, by the way.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, because there are so many mandatory programs that aren't actually for Indian country specifically, but Native people can access. So SNAP's a good example of that. Food stamps, right? We included that in the 31% of mandatory funding. But what's happening to SNAP? Maybe as soon as this weekend, it's shutting off. And so, even that isn't enough. There really needs to be a structure so that these programs, where possible, can function more almost like entitlement programs. I'll give you one other quick example. We found that, the Indian Health Service provides about $4,000 of care per patient every year. Well, when you look at Medicaid, that number is closer to 8,000. And when you look at Medicare, that number is closer to 16,000. And what's the difference? With these other healthcare programs, if you're sick, you just get the amount of care that you need. There's no cap. With the Indian Health Service, in many cases, tribal clinics, IHS facilities can only operate till their money runs out. They get a set appropriation every year. So they have to ration care. That is not a way to run a healthcare system. Why are we doing things differently for Indian country than we are for the rest of the population? I think that's the question that needs to be asked right now.
Yeah, and I'm always astounded at the fact that whereas we have seen during the Biden administration some gains with IHS funding.
We did.
However, the estimates are almost close to 10 times that, right? We got like $7 billion, but the true need is estimated at what, $73 billion? So
yep, sounds right.
I find that so astounding. And it used to be, and I don't know where that federal prisoners are allocated more funds than Native Americans. And
yeah, that I haven't checked that recently, but that absolutely was the case for many years.
Yeah.
Which again, the issue is not that we're trying to say who should have it worse, right?
No,
What I'm
that's true.
saying and what we're arguing, right, is saying that everyone, should have their full needs met, most
Parity. Yeah.
especially Native people who have that written in treaties that have the force of the law of the land, right? And so that's so important, and I think that gets missed in this conversation. The other point I'll say is so much of this funding, there's a lot of discussion in the US right now about reducing funding in areas related to DEI or race. And the thing that we emphasize is this is not needs-based, it's not race-based, it is based on these legal obligations. And that is so important to remember, and that is what makes this distinct.
Chance, I think you're on mute, Chance. Still on mute. Well, we'll move along. We'll come back to Chance. Robert, what do you feel that Congress will take this report seriously and really act on it when they come back? Because I love what you've done with it. I mean, you have talked about the structural shortcomings, right? But do you think they'll act on it?
One of the things we were encouraged by yesterday at the Senate Indian Affairs Committee hearing on the government shutdown is that Republican Senator and Chairwoman Lisa Murkowski cited the report by name.
Good.
And one of the things she did at the end, she left the committee, the witnesses, and the various attended folks with a charge saying, when we come back, I think we need to do what we've been talking about today and really think hard about the way that we fund and support Indian country. And she specifically said the way we meet our obligations to tribes.
Mhm.
So I think that is a really encouraging sign. I think that there's a real natural opportunity for, in the short run, Congress to do what they've already done with Indian Health Service, for example, and Bureau of Indian Affairs, and apply that to, or Bureau of Indian Education, and apply it to BIE, apply it to Bureau of Indian Affairs and maybe some other agencies in the federal government.
Mhm.
And you mentioned earlier the changes that the Biden administration made. One of the huge things they did was that advance appropriations. In the last shutdown, IHS had to close completely. So there has been some progress, and I think that could be a template for the short run. My hope is in the long run that they really do make this shift toward mandatory funding. And there's some reason to think that they might. There have been a series of Supreme Court rulings over the last several years that have said that the federal government must take steps to move certain funding around things like administrative costs for compacting and contracting to mandatory funding.
Mhm.
Now, Congress has dragged its feet on doing that, but there is, a series of court rulings that say they need to take action on this. So if they're going to open, the book and maybe take a look at a few of these areas, I'm hoping they take an expansive look at it.
Right. Robert, can you hear me now? Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes,
we
sir.
can. Yeah.
Okay.
You're back with us. Great.
Okay. Through your knowledge, working with tribes and, understanding Washington, to the best of your knowledge, how long do you think this shutdown is going to continue?
Yeah, they said in the hearing yesterday that there were some active conversations going around getting the government reopened. The
Mhm.
big thing that I'm not sure about, right, is it hinges on these subsidies for the Affordable Care Act, right? The Obamacare subsidies, and as many as 20 million people may be seeing their healthcare costs go up. The thing that I'm so confused about is it seems like both parties really want to keep these subsidies going, and the Republicans have a pretty strong incentive to, keep them in place. Like, you wouldn't want everyone's premiums going up in an election year. So I don't understand why it's taking so long. I think it's probably going to go at least another week. We'll see. I'd be really surprised if it was shorter than that. Beyond that, I mean, we are at this point like getting into unprecedented territory. If it goes that long, we're the longest shutdown in history, and so I don't think I could venture a guess beyond that. But I would be surprised if it opens in the next couple of days.
Mhm.
I took note how during I think it was during the Biden administration when there was a threat of a shutdown, President Biden canceled a trip to Europe, but yet this president, maybe I shouldn't get so overly political. Well, it's our show. But this president chose to go to Asia, and to me, it just showed a complete disregard for the American people in terms um, of taking care of business at home before you go out elsewhere, right? And I understand because there's tariffs and everything else. He's trying to negotiate and this, that, and the other. But as far as I'm concerned, he should have taken care of business at home before he went to Asia. And that's Levi Rickert's opinion, and I'm entitled to it. Well, I am encouraged though, by the bipartisan support because the native CDFI that's just under complete threat, even before the shutdown, right?
Yeah.
It's under threat. Well, what was it 105 GOP Congress members of Congress sent a letter, in support of the native CDFI. And to our viewers who don't know what those are, they are mechanisms across Indian country. I think there's 75-ish native CDFIs that actually help financing and in helping small entrepreneurs and tribes even to get funding and very much CDFIs work. They definitely work, and it's been attested, and so much support in Congress for it because it has been under threat before. So, Robert, what's your response? Were you excited when you saw the 105 members of Congress that gave support to native CDFIs?
Yeah, maybe to
Yeah,
our viewers, you can explain a CDFI to our viewers.
yes, CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution. They're a form of kind of nonprofit financial institution, and they tend to operate in communities where commercial banks bypass. So you see them in low income communities in both urban and rural areas, as well as on many native reservations, which historically have been some of the least served by, let's call them, mainstream financial institutions, right? And one of the things that always stands out about native CDFIs to me is the relationship basis for a lot of the lending work they do. They work with folks that may not have a traditional credit history in the way that many folks in the US do, or they may have had some issues with credit throughout their life, and so their credit score isn't where you'd want it to be, to go to an online bank or something like that. Or maybe they work with farmers or other folks working in the agriculture space that don't have a regular paycheck. They make one sale per year and they make all their money at once. And how do you structure a financial instrument about that? Or how do you make a financial instrument for trust land when the federal government owns the land under your house? So all of these questions are ones that native CDFIs grapple with. I was really encouraged to see the support for that, and I wasn't totally surprised. And the reason that is because you got to remember, within the GOP, they represent a lot of rural areas as well. And this comes back to kind of one of the things that I've talked about, which is the role of native-led institutions as anchors for all rural communities, regardless of someone's background. So native CDFIs, they focus on tribal communities, and most of their clientele are native, but they serve non-native people as well. They're non-native people that live on reservations in the communities that native CDFIs serve. You see the same thing with things like tribal colleges and universities. They primarily educate native people, but in some cases, they're the only university or college for an extended area, and non-native students go too. So I was really pleased to see that level of support, and it doesn't surprise me because these institutions are, in many cases, maybe the only finance or banking institution in a lot of communities, and they're serving native people, and they're serving non-native people as well.
Mm-hmm. I find it to be very important for tribes now, this being like a jigsaw puzzle or like a chess game, right? For us to understand how our money is being spent, where our money is being spent, um, also, how we're funded. And I'm not talking just tribal leadership. I'm talking about, citizens of a tribal community, as how we're being funded and what part we can play. Robert, you talked about it earlier, about having a cap on health, on a health insurance, whatever it may be. And it does seem to have the arrows pointing in one direction. Is a lot of times we as tribal people, we wait to get very sick before we get help. And this is just more of of a thing where we have to play our part now. We got this government shutdown. It's a tug of war, and we're the ones, as tribal people and as the human race that are being the guinea pigs of whatnot. Do you see in this next week? Do you see a little more bipartisan from both ends to get this thing up and going again?
Yeah, one of the things I'll just say about, just really quickly on Native access to healthcare, I think one of the things we got to keep in mind are the structural factors working against Native people, right? Part of the reason a lot of Native people wait till they're really sick is they may be uninsured. In IHS, as good as it is, I mentioned the caps. The other thing is it's the payer of last resort. So if you have any other form of potential payment for your healthcare, they'll make you go to that before they go to IHS. And so there are a lot of ways that healthcare for Native people are structured that disincentivize them from getting preventative
Hmm.
care, from getting things checked early. If your insurance requires a copay or you got a co-insurance, you got to pay 20% of it. That's prohibitive for some folks, right? And I think it's important to remember that. In terms of what may get Congress moving on the shutdown, one of the things that happened over the last week was the notices of the increase in insurance prices went out to every American that's enrolled in Obamacare. And so everyone has now seen how much their insurance costs, their premiums are going to go up next year if these subsidies aren't extended. I think that's going to provide a pretty strong incentive for Congress to get back together and begin meeting. And I think in particular for the GOP, with these notices going out, if folks are, going to town halls, they're going to hear from their constituents about how angry their constituents are that their healthcare costs are going up. And so my thought is if there's going to be something that gets folks to move, it may be these insurance notices going out, and that plus the ongoing shutdown is focusing a lot of attention on this issue of healthcare prices right now, I think.
Mm.
Hey, Robert, you do really great work. And this report that was released on Tuesday was just really one of several that has been released. How does this, first of all, tell our viewers, and I think I was a little negligent in the beginning, tell us your tribal affiliation and then what you do at Brookings. But how does this one fit into the overall scheme of things? And what do you really want to see happen as a result of its release?
Yeah, absolutely. Nuwapanam kan Utomas Masipia. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. So if you can see behind me, I've got a picture, of Wampanoag homelands of southeastern Massachusetts, which is where I grew up. This piece that we put out is one on a series of different Trump administration fiscal policies and how they're impacting Indian country. So we did one earlier this year looking if you remember at the OMB funding freeze that happened when all of these grants to different organizations and agencies across the US got unilaterally halted all at once. And now that there's an ongoing legal case about whether that was legal to do or not. Our team is also, we're diving into now some data, trying to measure the impact of the congressional budget bill, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act on Indian country. And we're in particular looking at the effect that bill is having on climate investment, clean energy, healthcare access, and nutrition assistance for Native people. So
Mm.
we're going to be coming out with some more work, looking at these policies moving forward. If and when Congress, puts together an appropriations bill, we may try and look at some aspects of that. And then, of course, there's just the ongoing, analysis of things like the impact of the Department of Government Efficiency, LMS Doge team, and the cuts that they have made, or the ongoing layoffs to different federal personnel. And we're trying to see if there are ways that we can assess the impact of those policy decisions on tribal communities as well. So this is something we're going to be continuing to work on. The other thing that we're starting to think about is we're in this moment of federal disinvestment. There's obviously a very clear relationship between the federal government and tribes. But one of the things that's been less clear is what role can states, can regional governments, can local governments play if they want to be proactive partners for tribes right now? So we're starting to think about that question too. And the relationship between those levels of government and tribes are a bit different because the trust relationship doesn't exist in the same way. It really needs to be a more voluntary, proactive relationship. And so that's
Mhm.
varied over time. And we're going to be doing a little bit of work to see are there opportunities for states, for communities, for cities to be better partners to tribes as well.
You bring up a very good point there because you're actually in a very beautiful territory. I mean, all of our areas are beautiful, but you're in an area. You're right there by Martha's Vineyard. You're right
Hmm.
there on the inner cities. Whether it's Boston and out going all the way down to New York, Strong Island, whatever it may be. And then you have some tribes that are just up in the plains or in Oklahoma, where in Oklahoma it's like a village. You have the 29, 30 tribes together,
Hmm.
and so the treatments could be different, because a lot of times when they
Absolutely.
say, oh, they're just up there on the plains and that's them up there, talk about, maybe different tribal communities being in different geographic environments, how has your treatment been up there with the state?
Yeah, I think for Wampanoag people, we have had a pretty proactive state government that we've been encouraged by. And I'm not in tribal leadership, right? So I should clarify that I'm
That's
not
okay.
firsthand involved with a lot of the stuff our tribe is doing. But there's been work that our tribe has been doing, for example, to partner with some of the organizations putting wind power off Cape Cod and talk about like some of the workforce development that can come from that. Our
Hmm.
tribe runs, actually, outside of upstate New York, the only IHS clinic in between Maine in North Carolina. And
Wow.
so, we're really embedded with the healthcare system on
Hmm.
Cape Cod and in Boston. And, so there are a variety of different energy, economic development, conservation efforts. We are proximate to Mashpee National Wildlife Refuge, Cape Cod National Seashore, and many of the conservation, fish and wildlife efforts that are involved there. So there's been a lot of opportunity. I think for us, we're lucky to be in a state that has prioritized that. And I know that's candidly like not the case for every tribe. There are a lot of states that are, dealing with much more adversarial or confrontational state governments, and so
Yeah.
we're kind of a little bit lucky in that regard.
Yeah.
Such as Oklahoma. Well, Rob, we need to wrap this up, but I will say, for one, I am really pleased that you are a native brother at the Brookings to
Well, I
really help
appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah.
represent. Because let me tell you what you guys do in terms of your reports. You help frame a lot of things that we as journalists were takes us months and months to get to maybe where you guys already are. And so I really love how, because when your reports come out, I just like to read them cover to cover, because well, yeah, I knew that. But you put it in such a nice fashion and intellectual way. And of course, Brookings Institution is recognized worldwide as one of the foremost think tanks, right? But I am happy we have a brother there. Chance, are you happy
Yes.
that we got brother Rob there?
Man, thank you so much, Robert, for all the work that you do, and I know you come from a very great community, and just keep up the greatness. And thank you, Levi, for always bringing some powerful insight each week. So we're looking forward to for our families, our relatives to view this, and best of luck to you. We want to thank your family for sharing you with Indian country.
Well, thank you, and Rob, thank you so much. And to our
Yeah.
viewers,
Thank you both.
yeah, Chimi Rich to you to tuning in now on Saturday, which will be tomorrow. The food stamp program is basically dried up, and we in Native communities, we know how to coalesce. We know how to take care of one another, and so um, let's. I like to tell the elders every week: take care of those young ones. Young ones, hug your elders. We are in this together. What truly, as we go into November, Native American Heritage Month, we may be facing some tough times because 1 in 4 Native Americans are reportedly on food stamps. So let's be sensitive. Let's show a lot of love and take care of our tribal communities. Chi Miigwech, we'll see you next week.